All right, folks. So now we are going to talk a little bit about economics as we transition into learning about ancient China. Now, earlier in this year, we talked about geography, we talked about politics and government when looking at Greece and Rome and Mesopotamia, and now it's a little bit about economics. I like this little PDF slideshow. However, we do not need every slide. We're only really going to need where it comes to slide 7. So we're going to move down here a little bit and start with this. I'm going to read you some things, underline, highlight, just kind of follow along on your own. Scarcity. This word up here, folks, is scarcity. This is a tough word. If something is scarce, that means that there's not a lot of it, right? It's a limited supply, scarcity. Okay. There's not a single country in the world that has an abundance, that means a lot, of all the resources that people need or want. Scarcity means there's a limited amount or limited supply of something. Because of this, countries must make plans for how to use these resources. When we study history, when we study different civilizations, even looking around the world today, we call these plans economic systems, right? Or the economies of countries. I like economic system though. When countries develop economic plans, there are some questions that they have to answer on a big micro and macro level. Number one, what are some goods and services that are the country's going to produce or make? Okay, I'll make a little note right here that the word produce here means to make something, create something. Okay, number two is how will goods and services be produced? And number three is who gets those? Who gets to consume those goods and services? This word consume and produce are very important words for us. We'll keep those in mind when we start to learn about these different types of economies. So, the way countries answer these questions is by creating a type of economy. Now, when countries are creating these economies, they don't necessarily say, hey, we're going to have a traditional or a command or a market economy. But these are three categories that economies can fall into. We're going to go through each one briefly. First one is a traditional one. Okay. In traditional economies, decisions are made on customs, traditions, beliefs of the past. People often do what they always do, make what they always made. They follow what their parents or grandparents or ancestors did. They don't necessarily change too much. Okay. This exchange of goods is done through bartering. Okay. I'm going to put a nice star next to this word right here, bartering. To barter means to trade without using money. Somebody gives somebody, you know, we can say if you had, a horse and you wanted a cow, or you wanted, let's use a better example. You had a horse and you wanted to trade for some metal from someone. You could trade your horse. That's supposed to be an arrow. You could trade your horse for their metal. I'm just going to erase that because that looks terrible. It's called bartering. Not a lot of places use um, the traditional economies or use bartering as much around the world today. It still happens, but it's not the main form of economy in the modern world. Okay. Let's scroll down. Command economy. A command economy means the government is in charge. Think about the government giving commands. Okay. The government owns property. They own businesses. They set the prices for things. They decide how much oil will cost, or even types of food. They decide how much people get paid. This is a system that hasn't traditionally worked usually in the world. Throughout history, there have been many countries that have tried it, like Russia has tried it, Cuba has tried it, North Korea. It doesn't always work. Um, Most of the time, when the government gets too much power, the people don't always like that. It's hard to live under. And again, I gave you some examples here. Most of these countries have also a similar type of government called a communist government. Where the government controls everything. The people don't necessarily get to vote or have a say. And then we come to a market economy. In the modern world, this is the most common economy. Decisions for the economy are based on changes that buyers and sellers, well, changes with how buyers and sellers interact, meaning how much people want to sell versus how much people want to buy. There's something called free enterprise. Okay, free enterprise. The big star. We'll put a star there. Means that companies can't compete. Right? You can have two companies who make the same thing, and they can both exist at once. Maybe one company will make something cheaper, or shoes, for example. Right? You have different shoe brands, different from Jordans to Nike, Yeezys, Adidas. All these different brands of shoes are all competing to get people to buy their shoes. Sometimes shoes are more expensive, sometimes they're cheaper. The government cannot decide. This is big. The government cannot decide how much things cost necessarily. Now, the government can do some like making sure that they have some rules that companies have to follow, but in a market economy, private businesses make their own decisions. Okay? However, there's no such thing as a true not market economy because again, things can be a little bit crazy. So there are some laws that the governments make to make sure things like food and medicine are accessible to everybody. So let's go down and just give a couple more examples. Here's where some countries in the more modern world would fall on this economy. Okay, just a little bit of an introduction. Next thing you guys are going to do is look at some vocabulary terms, including command, market, and mixed economy.